Good day on this beautiful weekend, on this beautiful Saturday. Um, Today we are going to do a live stream on Hannah Ritchie's Not the End of the World, chapter number 5. We have been doing this for a few weeks now, but this is going to be the first live stream that is going to be well, going to be published later on. um, so last week we also had a live stream, but the recording wasn't perfect. So this is going to be our second attempt at it. So today we are going to do food, how not to eat the planet, and yeah. If you want to join in with these discussions later on, we're going to discuss the notes that we've done on the chapter. You can join us at the Discord, or you can always ask questions, of course, during the live stream itself. So I'm going to pay some attention to the chat later on. So let's start. And today we are doing this again with Windrammer. Uh, so hello again.
Hello.
Cake. There we go. And I do see some audio levels on your end. So I suppose that you're going to be audible in the recording later on and be audible in the live stream. Um, yeah, so let's start. Let's dive in. So let's take the book. I so the people are going to see my end of it, also my notes, at least the parts that I've highlighted. So if you have any parts that are highlighted or have any notes, then do chime in.
Okay.
All right, then. Well, let's start. So the first is well, through this. Ye- Let me just see. What did I note again? um, Oh, right. So the book the chapter is starting with a figure that we only have 60 harvests left, or 100, or whatever the number is. And well, if this is going to be true, then well, the doom's clock has been set, and there's nothing left to do, of course. So, what are we going to do if that is the case? Because later on in the chapter, she argues that going completely organic, which is often the touted solution for this, isn't actually feasible because we just have too few planets, too less planets to actually do that kind of thing. But it isn't true because in the next page we see that there is no such number as an X amount of harvests left. So any soil scientist, she says, that you're going to ask about how many harvestables is left, they'll just laugh at you. I know that Hede Boersma, which is linked to the Dutch branch of We Planet, um, he is a soil scientist, a microbiologist, and he often makes the point that uh, there is no such thing as a dead soil. Soil can't be dead because otherwise farmers are going to have big problems because many of the produce that is being produced is because of soils actually being very much alive with all kinds of microbiomes, microorganisms, etc. Um, so yeah, where does this number come from? She asks Hannah in the book, and there is apparently no source for this. So apparently the 60 harvest left was brought into this world in 2014 during a conference of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. Um, but who it said or why or what the arguments were was unable to be replicated. So we don't know why it was being said. But it is complete nonsense, as Hannah Ritchie says. So before we go to the next point, do you want to remark on this?
No, I just want to highlight this part that the book says the FAO has never provided anything to back this up, and the person who made the statement has never come forward to defend it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's not a good look.
It's interesting that we can't actually trace back that even we don't know who it said apparently. So it's very odd. Um, so she goes on with the question then of if we are going to look at the world today, huh, how much food is being produced. Um, yeah, do we have any idea how many mouths can be fed with it? Well, you know the answer, but many people don't know the answer. Um, so I actually didn't know the answer before reading it. I think more or less it's more or less equal to the amount of calories that we need, but apparently it's double the amount of calories that we need. So she says that if we split the world's food production equally between everyone, we could have at least 5,000 calories a day, more than twice of what we need. Or to put it another way, we produce enough food for a population twice the size that it is today. So 16 billion people. That is something that we could feed if we want to. Um, so yeah, that's a remarkable number. Then again, it triggered with me the question. So apparently, then about 50% is then wasted, isn't it? So that's not quite true. We get to that, but yeah, that's a big number. So half of it being wasted to non-human feeding, right? So being trashed in the bin or doing other stuff with it. Um, right. So on the next bit, so how we got to now, she basically describes um, well, the reason why we got into agriculture, which wasn't a free choice. We have been doing roaming or hunter gathering of the planet since basically our species began, and before our species, Neanderthals and Homo erectus, etc. They all did the same thing, and that is roam the planet, hunt for big animals, gather lots of plant-based food, so berries and stuff like that. But in the wilds, not via agriculture. And this was actually a big reason why outside of Africa, um, uh, most megafauna, so most of the big animals, have gone extinct over the last thousands of years. Mammoths are, of course, a well-known example. Giant sloths in Latin America are a well-known example, linked to the avocado, of course. Um, but a more recent example is the island of Mauritius, which is an island that wasn't populated by humans until about, I believe, the 16th or 17th century. And it was, I believe, that we, the Dutch, found it, discovered it. Um, and at least we used it as a port or as a place to refill our stocks when we go to the Indonesia, etc. At the time. Um, and Mauritius was, of course, well known for a big bird, or big bird was actually knee height about, or a bit bigger, the dodo. So the dodo had no idea what a human was. So they were basically like fearless against us. They had no fear towards humans. And So basically, all we had to do was tick it on the head, and it went down, and we had some meal for the day. So within a few years, the dodo went to extinction. Yay, Dutch. Uh, um, so that happened. But that is also vice versa is also going on because where we see megafauna or most megafauna in the world today is in Africa, and that's not a coincidence because the megafauna in Africa has co-evolved with humans. For a very long time, they know what humans are in the most primal being, and they know how dangerous these apes are. So, a well-known example is the zebra. Had that I don't know if it is a myth or if it is a real thing still, but the tale goes that you can't tame the zebra. So that's why you don't have any horse riding in Africa because the zebra was untamable, because it is being afraid for humans. So the first instinct is to get the fuck out of the way of when you see a bunch of humans coming up. So yeah, that was just a short remark based on this comment. Um, so, right. So eventually, at around 10, 15, 20,000 years ago, that era, um, we started running out of big meat, right? Uh, so we traveled all across the planet. That's basically the reason why we did travel all across the planet is that we went to an area, we hunt the big animals to extinction in that area, and then we went to the next area at infinity, basically. So that's why we colonized the planet after we went out of Africa. Um, but eventually we ran out of big meat. So what happened? We were forced to go into agriculture. So around 10,000 years ago, we see the agricultural revolution happening. Um, First, very primitively, of course, but later on, more sophisticated. Um, but the first millennia of that so-called revolution, um, you see that when we dig up the skeletons from that time, you see a lot shorter skeletons. You see bent bones, etc. So you know that this time wasn't exactly a very great time to be alive in. Huh? If you so, I just want to emphasize here that this wasn't a free choice. It was actually fucking hellish to move to agriculture because if a harvest goes bad and you don't have any food, then you die of hunger, and even in under the best of circumstances, you have to plow the field with your hand, break your back, etc., etc., and still have a very nominal, very low yield, plant-based diet, which wasn't as nutritious as plants are today because 10,000 years ago, all the plants that we have now in the shop didn't exist. Those plants are actually the result of 10,000 years of doing cultivation. So the wild varieties of those plants are not as nutritious, etc. So if you are you still there, or did I bore you to that?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Um, so do you have any remarks before going to the next bit?
No, I didn't. I have notes on the next one.
Okay. So the Haber-Bosch process, or not?
Yes.
Well, go ahead because I don't have notes here directly.
Yeah, like actually, it's more of a question about the Haber-Bosch. Like, why do people say it's inefficient? Like, isn't it like 70% efficient?
Where do you see that? Or Is it not in the text?
Oh, it's my no, it's not in the text. It's my question because Hannah is basically saying that the Haber-Bosch process it's great, and I agree,
Hmm.
but the usual counter is that it's inefficient, and I don't know why people say that because isn't it like 70% efficient?
How do you get to the number of 70%?
I just Google it to be honest.
Ah, fair enough. um, yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Um, it is a pretty efficient process, I think, because there's no real other way of doing it. I mean, we have been trying for thousands of years and we haven't been able to. So you see in a bit a graph coming up that the world population goes whoop as soon as Haberbosch is being implemented. Um, so I'm not sure why people say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then well, let's continue. I do have a short note on the next page. Oh yeah, right. So this is the I was just talking about organic food, and the reality is that the world cannot go organic. Too many of us rely on fertilizers to survive, Anna says. So, and you see the chart here that are, you see the around the start of this century where the Haber-Bosch process was invented around 1909, 1910. And then you see it slowly uptaking. So people supported by fertilizers is currently at 3.6 billion people. So yeah, if you're going to simply say well, we are going to stop with fertilizers, then we are unable to feed 3.6 billion people. That's the reality of it. Um, what does surprise me, though, is that if you ignore the bit that is supported by fertilizers, so the people supported without fertilizers is also steadily going up. It's not going as rapidly as the other, as the total, but it is still 3.8 billion people. Um, so these are numbers, by the way, from 2015. So it's not the 8 billion people that we have today, but still, that's a lot of people. And I'm not entirely sure why that is, because I mean I can see efficiencies regarding maybe GMOs um, and other techniques, but yeah, I'm not sure why that happens now and not, for example, 500 years ago, because we didn't know how to do gene splicing at the time, but we did know how to make better plants via crossbreeding, etc., etc., which is essentially the same process, but a lot slower. Um, so yeah, do you have any idea? If you don't, then
No, no
it's
idea.
okay. I was just wondering out loud. So yeah, these bits are about Haberbosch and Norman Borlaug. The latter one being the instigator of the so-called Green Revolution in the 60s and 70s, starting in Mexico and later on in India. So I did highlight some parts from this. So in 1960, Mexican farmers could expect a wheat yield of 1.5 tons per hectare. Today, the improved varieties of wheat that Berlach unlocked, they can get 5.5 tons. So that's a factor of almost four more. That's huge. That's a huge improvement. And also, this is about India in 1960. India was achieving less than a ton per hectare. Now they are producing more than 3 tons. Um, so yeah, that's a huge improvement. That is being unlocked via crossbreeding. um, which is something that people in the past could have done, I think. But yeah, apparently Borlaug was the first one to actually do it. um, Yeah, and this is a more general point that I highlighted. So he crossbreeded breakthrough. His crossbreeding breakthroughs showed that even when the challenges seems unsurmountable, there is often an opportunity to engineer our way out. And this is a more general point, I think, is that technology is actually quite important. Um, and degrowers have often this idea that technology is either stagnant or a negative for human well-being or environmental well-being. So we shouldn't be relying on technology and go back to monkey or whatever. Uh, well, that's maybe a bit overstating the point, but technology is often being reviewed as something skeptical towards. And I think that we do need technology, a lot of technology, to actually move forward. And as Hannah is saying herself, we don't actually have a choice in the matter anymore. We can't say we're going to abolish fertilizers because that would kill billions of people, right? So yeah, I think we always have to march forward. Um, Right. So at around the same time as Borlaug was doing his Green Revolution, there was this idea that population explosion was going to cause mass famine. So a well-known example of this is Paul R. Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb of 1968, where he says that in the 70s and 80s there will be millions, hundreds of millions of people that are going to die due to famine. So what we need, says Ehrlich, is that we need to uh, do lots of things that are not so great, to put it very mildly. So what Hannah is saying about it was what makes this book so terrible are the inhumane policies he advocated for based on a strong and wrong conviction. And he's talking about sterilization, putting sterilizers in drinking water in the United States, doing forced sterilization in places like India, or even a triast system where people were just left to die, saying, well, India is a lost cause, just let them die from starvation. It's, I mean, um, I've seen milder fascists than this. I mean, this is pretty crazy stuff, you know? And the guy is still
Yeah, I
alive, by the
think
way.
the
My
best
God.
argument up
Hmm.
yeah, I think the best argument against Paul Ehrlich is just quotes from his own book.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And he makes some very determined predictions, and predictions just come out false again and again and again and again. Um, so people are still buying this story that we are just on the brink of mass starvation. It's just going to happen now, and if a prediction is made, let's say from 2030 onwards, and 2030 comes and goes, they just pick a new date, and it happens. It's more or less like the doomsday prediction. Huh? The world is going to end on this date, and the date it comes and goes, and a new date is being picked over and over again. It's very much like that. Uh, so, short point on the on the end of this bit is that Hannah says it's possible to feed 8, 9, or 10 billion people a nutritious diet without wrecking the planet. I mean, in the light of Paul Ehrlich's argument, I would say that we actually have a problem with population decline. And that from the 2100 onwards, we will see a global population decline. And that's actually going to be a big problem, big issue. Currently, we in the West are already having this problem of population decline, but we can, to some extent, uh, well, counter it via immigration, for example. This is also a very politically uh, uh, polarizing subject because of xenophobia, etc. But essentially, we can immigrate a lot of people and counter that problem. But from 2100 onwards, we'll see a global decline in population. And I'm not entirely sure how we can solve that, to be honest. What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure if I should give my opinion on that on a live stream, to be honest.
It's a hot one. Okay, okay. It's too hot for you to
Yeah.
say out loud. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, basically, I don't think. Well, basically, it goes like this. I think that people have too high expectations now for, finding love.
Okay. That's it, or I was expecting more.
I mean, I could go on, but it gets too spicy.
Okay, I can make this more spicy if you like. Um, I think that we'll see a discussion popping up at the around the end of the century, where we actually um, artificially use or use artificial wombs to grow our population. So essentially, create humans without parents. Um, obviously they're going to have biological parents because you need the sperm and the egg, etc. But they won't have or might not have parents in the social sense. So this creates a whole topic of problems that we need to solve. So if you're going to have artificial wombs, creating millions of people, just to have some kind of population stabilization, um, then how do we raise those children? How do we socialize those children? What does it mean? Are they going to be is this going to be a thing by the state? Is this going to be a thing by the community, etc.? So, but I do expect this discussion to pop up because radical depopulation is going to be a much bigger problem. So in South Korea, I've mentioned this before, but the population is being halved in every generation now. They have a replenishing rate or whatever it's called of the zero point 0.7, I believe, over 0.8. So basically, for every two people, a man and a woman, less than one child is being made for the new generation. So halving of the population. Um, and that's the most extreme example right now. So maybe South Korea is a well-developed society, highly technological. So maybe they are going to actually have this discussion early on because they are also quite xenophobic. So they won't let a lot of immigrants into South Korea to counter the problem of depopulation. So yeah, I do expect this going to happen, but this is going to create a whole bunch of new problems.
Yeah, I can see that happening, though I will hope for immortality, to be honest.
Either that, yeah, or an immortality. I mean, we can. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, I wouldn't mind having immortality in my lifetime. So,
Yeah,
let's go back to the book. Let's see. Da, 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 da. Let's see. What is this? The bigger question is how. Right. So next, I was starting the chapter with saying, well, about 50% of all food is apparently being wasted. That's not quite true. Some of it is wasted, quite a bit of it actually, but a lot of it is being used for other things, like feeding livestock and putting it in cars via biofuel. So that's about half of it actually. We that that so. That's it is more than half actually. So that's why we see the 2,500 calories. So we produce 5,000 calories for every single individual, but we use a lot of it to make meat, which is producing fewer calories, right? So maybe a bit higher quality food, but it's still fewer calories overall. And of course, if you're going to burn it into a car, then you have 0 calories for human consumption. You want to say something? Or?
no.
Okay. So we see a chart here titled "Over half of the world's cereals goes directly to human food." Only half, not over half. So only half. And you see that in Chad and India and Nigeria, you see had a vast majority being used for human consumption. But in places like Canada, USA, Germany, it's far less than half, right? So much of it is being used for meat production, but also and especially in the United States for biofuels. Um, so yeah, that's I'm not sure what processing means here. So maybe that's a loss, that's a waste. But yeah, 35% for biofuels. That's a ridiculous amount. So media
By the
dilemma.
way,
Hmm?
those those biofuels, at least in the US, are mostly, what's it called? Methanol.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And that's a funny story because they sold it as a climate solution, but I think they just wanted to change the octane booster, and they wouldn't get any government, handouts if they were just changing the octane booster from something that wasn't so good to something more environmentally friendly.
Hmm.
He sold it as a climate solution to get government handouts. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Meanwhile, people are going to be hungry because of this nonsense. Oh well. Um, so media dilemma, an inefficient way of making tasty food. Yeah, so essentially the argument that she's making here is that especially cow meat and lamb meat is being hugely inefficient, and we see a, a graph. It's not quite a graph, but you see that had calories from feed, that only 3% of it is being converted to animal calories that we can consume eventually. For lamb, it's 4%, and then it gets somewhat better for pig and chicken, uh, respectively 9 and 13%. So it's not great to make meat, at least this way, the animal way. Um, too bad she isn't really talking about technologies. Well, she does talk about lab meat, but not about precision fermentation. Maybe it's simply not as had to developed enough to talk about it in the book. But well. So what was I highlighting here? Where meat and dairy products are good is that they are a complete protein source, right? So that means that hey, they might lose a lot of protein we feed them, but they do produce higher quality with a full spectrum of essential amino acids we need for good health. And this is of course an argument that is being used against veganism and against vegetarianism to a lesser extent. That we need this full palette, this full spectrum of amino acids for our own health. But, and that's the point that she makes right after, pulses such as peas, meat, beans, and soy also have a very good amino acid profile. It's not as good as meat, but it's quite close and it's pretty okay. So the only real exception is vitamin B12, which is also the common arguments raised against veganism. Um, but yeah, it's not too bad to eat peas, beans, and soy, I suppose. And many people don't even have the choice in the matter. Let's see. So bit later on, she talks about food being the heart of the world sustainability problems. How, if we're going to make the world sustainable, then we have to tackle the food issue. So, as seen as in chapter 3, she says the food system is responsible for 1/4 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And worried about pressures on freshwater supplies, agriculture is responsible for around 70% of global freshwater withdrawals, when in some tropical regions more than 90%. So that's a big number, of course. Do you know what's the number for Costa Rica? Or
No, I will have to look for it.
all right, then we see a another figure. So of the land surface, of all the land surface, 71% of the Earth's land surface is habitable, and 46% of that 71% is being used for agriculture. So 38% is forest, and just 1% is urban, so it's cities, right? Um, and of that 46% agriculture, 77% of that is used for livestock and only 23% for crops. So we could actually free up the vast amount of agricultural lands in the world and give it back to nature essentially, because why have, for what else would we use it? Um, or maybe put on solar panels or whatever. um, and essentially restore biodiversity that way. So that's a big win we could have with just switching off from meat or going vegan or having a technological fix for it that we'll discuss in a moment. So a few highlights here. Let me see. So many of the environmental problems in farming relate to two things: how much land we use and how we manage inputs such as water and fertilizers. The solutions we need to feed everyone in a sustainable way come back to trying to reduce the amount of land we use for farming as much as possible. We should give other wildlife as much land back as we can. Globally, we are making progress on this. often because of the intensification of agriculture. Emphasis by Hannah Ritchie, using inputs such as fertilizers to get higher yields. So this is actually quite an important point that Hede Boersma is also making it again and again, that intensification is actually way better for biodiversity than extensification or using more land, like with organic farming. Um, so is she saying that here? No, we will probably get to that point, but later on she's making the point that biological bio farming is actually um, better for insects, but the point that Hidde is making again is that if you look at if you compare um, biological farming on the one side, which is using more land, of course. It's about using 1.5 times more land because it's less productive. Um, versus in intensive land plus the rest, the other half, having forest or wild nature, then that is actually way better for biodiversity than biological farming. Um, so yeah, then some stats that Hannah is raising. We might assume that our demand for farmland is never ending, but that's not true. A few years ago, a number of researchers predicted that we might be close to peak agricultural land. And the leading data source, the UN's FAO, suggests that we've passed peak around the year 2000. So I think this is the graph for this. Um, yeah, so we are dropping in the amount of land being used for this. That's interesting. Um, pop, 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 pop. Right, right. So the next heading is how the world will soon pass peak fertilizer. Is she's asking, okay, so how is it possible with more people to feed? How can we use less fertilizer? How is that possible? Um, and she's explaining, but fertilizer use has plateaued or is falling in many rich countries. In the US, fertilizer use hasn't been increased since the mid 1970s. Meanwhile, food production has increased by 75%. France now uses about half as much fertilizer as it did in the 1980s. The same is true for the UK and the Netherlands. And the reason for this is essentially that we've become way more effective and efficient at using fertilizer. So we are just using fertilizer on the bit that we need to use it and not just spreading it across the land. No notes for you?
No.
Okay, then let's go on. So, how to feed everyone without destroying the planet. That's the next heading, is also the subheading for this chapter. So, how can we feed 2 billion people this century without destroying the planet? And then she gives some numbers. So say we went back to monkey, go back to hunter-gatherer societies. How much land do we actually need in that case to supply enough people for 8 billion people? And she comes to a number of 800,000 million square kilometers. So that's many times Earth, like the size of Jupiter or something. I don't know. It's it's kind of ridiculous how much land that is. Um, so that's off the table, I suppose. So if we're going to less effective methods, I think, yeah. So I've made a note that we're going to discuss later on anyway. So, how about a return to early organic methods of farming? So, the organic methods, the biological farming, would need also like 800 million square kilometers. Yeah, so a lot less than the hunter-gatherer societies, a factor thousand less, but still a ridiculous amount. Um, let's see, what is this chart? Right, this is productivity per hectare. Yeah, so cereal yields as are measured in tons per hectare. So cereal yields are like in the US are 8 tons per hectare, and in Africa they are still only 1.6 tons. So they still need to have their green revolution, I suppose. Um, then she comes up with some, yeah, some advices to improve the situation for the future. And the first thing is improve crop yields across the world. Right? So that's why she came up with this graph. And the second one is eat less meat, especially beef and lamb. We've also discussed that now. All right, so the thing I highlighted was that, in fact, the change from people who go from beef to only chicken is a lot better and makes a lot more difference than going from a chicken eater going vegetarian. So that is how much beef actually impacts with greenhouse gas emissions, land use, freshwater withdrawals, and eutrophication, which is water pollution. I'm just steaming ahead if you don't have anything to note. So do interrupt me if you have anything. Um,
Okay.
we'd save 2 billion. Right. Okay. So at the next page, she makes an interesting point. So still, it's let me see where it starts. So the world uses around 4 billion hectares of land to grow food, which is about 40 million square kilometers. Um, well, it isn't about that. It is that because facts are not different. But researchers mapped out different scenarios of how this would change if everyone in the world adopted different diets. So, say we would simply cut out beef and lamb entirely. What would happen? We'd save about 2 billion hectares. So, half of all the land that we are using for agriculture. So 20 million square kilometers, or the size, twice the size of the United States, as she says. Um, that's like immense. So if you're going to cut dairy too, then we would cut another billion hectares. So another 10 million square kilometers. So we would go from 40 million square kilometers to 10, which is a ridiculous amount of difference. And that's just beef, lamb, and dairy. That's just, it's kind of ridiculous how much impact that has. So here we have a graph again. Cropland, pasture. Right, so this is essentially what, in a graph, what she was saying. Going from 4.13 billion hectares to 1 billion. If you would go completely vegan, so that's vegan. I didn't understand it that way. It was oh right. So okay. So if we had still eggs and fish, and no red meat, dairy or poultry, then we would have 1.01. So it makes a very marginal difference. Um, and if we still ate chicken, then it was 1.1 billion. So also a very small difference. So what is the third recommendation that Hannah makes? And that this is going to be the techno fix. So invest in meat substitutes, building burgers in the lab. Yeah, so she's very positive. She takes a story from her own life, an anecdote that her brother is a real meat eater apparently, or was a real meat eater. I'm not sure if that's still the case. Um, and he was always picking out the differences between the corn and soy meat, etc. That's he always thought it was very different from real meat, animal meat. So then she says, the day I knew the world was onto something is when some years later he ate a plant based meal and didn't notice the difference. So his wife sneaked one of the plant based meats into the chili con carne and he didn't blink an eye. In fact, he couldn't believe it wasn't meat. If anything, it was the best chili he ever had. So if my brother can be won over, almost anyone can. So that's interesting. You have to make the differences also tastier, but also cheaper. If it is going to be cheap, then obviously people are going to buy it over animal meat. Um, yeah, so switch your beef burger for Beyond Meat or Impossible Burger, and you cut emissions by around 96%. It's a huge difference. Here's another graph. This graph is about the carbon footprint in so per 100 grams of protein. Yeah, so there's a huge difference here. So obviously, again, we beef and lamb have the biggest impact. And if we go to the Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat, it's like 1/25th, like 4% of the original impact. A variation of this idea is building a hybrid burger, which is her fourth recommendation. So, what is a hybrid burger? It's essentially saying, well, okay, you can have your meat, your beef, but mix it up with soy or chicken and make your burger patty that way, for example. Yeah, that's a thing. And apparently, it makes a big impact as well. I didn't make any notes on this. So the fifth recommendation, there are quite a few recommendations. Substitute dairy with plant-based alternatives. Okay, so we all know the uh, uh, milk substitutes like um, what is it called in English? The almond milk and stuff like that, right? I'm not a huge fan of those, to be honest. So this is where I miss the um, point of precision fermentation, where animal-less real milk, is being produced in these big steel vats made by microorganisms. So essentially, they make the same protein, lactose, I believe it was, or I forgot. But anyway, so what makes cow milk? And yeah, that's a real thing that's actually being sold right now in the United States, not in Europe, sadly. So, did you already have animal-less milk?
Not that I know.
Not available in Costa Rica now. Well,
I
may
haven't seen any in the supermarket, to be honest.
yeah. That's maybe in a few years, but it's already out there. So it just has to siphon through to our parts in the world. So the six is an obvious one, waste less food, and she makes an interesting point that this can actually be quite simple in transportation, for example. So when farmers used plastic crates instead of bags, um, the losses were reduced up to 87%. Rather than losing one fifth, they lose as little as 3% because if you put them in bags, there's a lot of damage with the produce, and yeah, because of that damage, it can't be sold anymore. So it becomes waste. And with using simple plastic crates instead, it's an immense reduction in food waste. It's interesting. It's a very simple solution. Um, so I do have some notes on the indoor farming. So her seventh recommendation is don't rely on indoor farming, so vertical farms and stuff, um, because she thinks it is a technology that won't deliver. And the reason why she says that is that it needs a lot of energy, especially for lighting. So instead of relying on the sun, you rely on a lot of LED lights, and that costs a lot of energy if you rely on that. So one study estimates that it would cost $18 to produce a loaf of bread from wheat grown in indoor farm. Um, and last but not least, regarding this, is that once we include the land use of the electricity source, and she assumes solar panels, the land savings from vertical farms can disappear entirely. In some cases, they'll actually need more land than in a normal field. And this is where I take some issue because, I mean, she is pro nuclear energy, but she doesn't include it here. And we both know that it is actually extremely cheap to um, operate nuclear energy, right? So it isn't very cheap to build them in the first place, perhaps, but once built, they produce a lot of very cheap electricity. So yeah, I'm not sure if vertical farms are going to be excluded simply because we wouldn't use nuclear energy, or yeah, I'm not sure. What do you think?
Doesn't the Netherlands already do vertical farming for like plants? I think I've heard of something like that. Maybe it was another country. But the thing is, in the US, probably it doesn't make sense because land is very cheap, very big country with not a lot of people,
Mm.
and energy as cheap as it is in the US, it could still be cheaper. So yeah, maybe it doesn't make sense in the US, but the thing is, there's other smaller countries that will build nuclear plants and have very cheap energy. I'm not sure it will be excluded like everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And the point that I made earlier in private was the economic case might not exist yet for doing this. But if we do something similar like carbon taxes, but then for land they use, say that we want to have a land tax because we want to improve biodiversity and give more land back to the wild nature, we can actually make a political choice to emphasize more on vertical farming and essentially cut down our entire agricultural footprint from planet Earth as a whole. So going back to so cutting away meat, which is something I think will happen this century, if not by veganism, then it will happen by technological improvements. So at some point, I do expect that the meat industry will simply cease to exist. So we are going to cut 3/4 of all land use from that alone. Um, but yeah, if we do want to cut the last 10 million square kilometers of planet Earth, then vertical farming is the way to go. And we do need lots of cheap energy for that. And I think that nuclear is the only way of doing that, personally. But yeah, I think we agree on this.
Yes.
Uh, let's go to the last few bits. So at the end of every chapter, Hannah Ritchie is ending the chapter with things to stress less about. So what does she have to say here? So the first thing is that eating local is a myth. Huh? So the idea that eating local is better for the environment is a complete uh, legend. It's a myth. So what did I highlight? Does So yeah, the point is that um, what we eat matters much more for our carbon footprint than how far it is traveled to reach us. Huge difference. She comes up with some numbers. Let me see. Yeah. So one of the things is transport is quite insignificant. For example, most food is being transported by ship instead of by plane, which makes a huge difference, of course. Um, and per unit of whatever you're transporting, the emissions are actually quite low because a ship can transport a fuck ton of stuff, right? So, um, for example, bananas. Yeah, we don't even have the option in the Netherlands to grow them. But say that we do, then it would actually be way better to import them from a place like Costa Rica than to grow them here because it would cost much more, a lot more energy in and the greenhouses to make them. Um, which is a point that she makes as well. So let's see, what is this? Hmm. So there are many examples where importing food has a lower footprint. Importing Spanish lettuce to the UK during winter months reduces the emissions 3 to 8 fold. Huge difference. Um, if we were to compare. Oh, right. So that is the second point. So before I go to the second point, do you want to make a comment on this? Or?
No.
Then moving on to the second. Eating organic, it's not always better for the environment. Well, this is another big idea on the Greens, the left maybe, that organic farming, biological farming is a lot better for the environment than it is than intensive farming is, or conventional farming. Um, but what does she say about it? If we were to compare 1 hectare of organic cropland and 1 hectare of conventional croplands, we'd probably find healthier ecosystems on the organic farm. So this is again, I'm referring back to the comment I made a few minutes ago. If you're not going to uh, uh, give a wider picture, then yes, that is true. So if you're going to only look at the land of organic farms and only at conventional farms, but the point is that organic farms use more land, and the more land is at the cost of mostly wild areas, wildlife areas. So I would say actually that, and Hede Boersma makes this point often, is that the setup where you have conventional farming and a bit of for the wildlife is actually way better for wildlife. Not just insects, but also bigger animals. The other one is but its big Achilles heel of organic farming. It tends to be that it gives us lower crop yields, which, yes, you know where I'm going, means we need to use more land. Sava, let's go on. So, as I write this book, Anna says, this policy is creating a havoc for farmers across Sri Lanka. So in 2021, the Sri Lankan government suddenly banned the import of fertilizers into the country, wanting the country to move towards organic farming. It has been a disaster. For some reason, I never hear Sri Lanka being put up by those that defend organic farming. So for some reason, that's always being forgotten. Um, so it's a complete disaster, and the Sri Lankan government already has completely reversed this policy after an explosion in food prices, etc. So that wasn't helping in political stability for one. So yeah, and that was that. So the snap decision, Hannah makes the point, has given us the short-lived window into what the world might look like if we went organic. Blah 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 blah. So in some situations it is the best solution, but it cannot be a blanket solution, and it is not going to fix our food system. Important point. So then I do have, yeah, I do have a note on the a bit later on. So, but the important question, she's now talking about pesticides, is whether we should be worried about these levels of pesticides residues. So the World Health Organization has established safe daily intake levels where exposure has no negative effects on human health. Then she goes on about this point. But this point reminded me a little on the very similar argument being made for nuclear energy, which is the LNT model, the linear no threshold model, where in legislation it is, well, there's some bad science from the 50s and 60s that is being put into legislation where it essentially says that no level of radiation whatsoever is a safe level. The science says something different, but that there are safe levels that have no impact on human health, especially because the Earth is a nuclear planet. There's radioactive radiation all around us, everywhere, all the time. Life has evolved with this. So if you reach a certain level of radiation, of course, the dose makes the poison, then radiation becomes a problem. But the same argument goes with pesticides residues. So, and we see that the levels being used are actually far less than what the local legislation is saying. So the majority, 75% of US foods were less than 0.01% of the limit. So this means that residue levels were a million times lower than the threshold that would have observable effects on our health. And this is similar from a range of countries. Um, if you're not going to interject, I'm going to
Well,
continue. Yeah.
I I thought of maybe an analogy. People usually don't like my analogies, but I just thought of an analogy about intensive farming and organic farming. Like, think of organic farming as a cancer that maybe is not very dense, but it's very spread, and intensive farming as a cancer that is very dense but very small.
That's an interesting analogy.
Like that's yeah, like that's how I see it at least.
But a cancer regardless.
And to be honest, yeah, and personally, I would rather go with the very dense, very small cancer because I mean, yeah, it's easier to what's the word to you know separate from the rest,
So
to
why
isolate.
is it a cancer, and then how do we solve the cancer? Do we want it solved then? I'm not sure how this analogy works, so I'm still wondering.
Oh, uh, oh, I'm saying that regardless of how we do farming, some damage is always going to be done. So I'm saying that farming is like cancer. So it's a choice between a very spread, mer maybe not very dense in the sense that the damage per square meter is not very large, but it's very, but as a total is very big. So
Right.
yeah,
Uh, I'm not sure if everyone in the eco-modernist movement would like to see this as a cancer, but let's leave it at that for now. But
yeah, like I'm saying it's like not, I'm saying it's a cancer for ecosystems, not for humanity necessarily. But
right.
I'm just saying that, yeah, maybe cancer is a very strong word, but I'm just saying that regardless of how we do farming, some damage is always going to be done, and as long as we went to it, it's not going to be zero.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I can see that. All right. Then let's go to the last bit. So that's the heading. So if we do all this, how could the world in 2060 look like? Um, yeah, I'm not sure if you have any ideas on this, but I just highlighted the part. This might sound a bit magical over the optimistic version of the future. I think I agree with that statement. Um, so, what was the thing that got me? I think it was just that we massively stopped with eating meat because we want vegan. I don't see that happening. So the idea of veganism has been around for a long time now, like over a century, and only a very small part of the world population is vegan out of choice. I don't see
I
that.
mean, it could,
Yeah. Hmm?
maybe it could happen if you count, what's it called, precision fermentation
Mhm.
as veganism.
Sure, but that's not what she meant, I think. But yeah, I get your point. Um, but there is, I mean, there is quite a difference between the plant-based Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger, whatever it is called. And the Dutch we have the vegetarian butcher, um, which is also quite an. They have quite an extensive palette of products, but this is all plant-based. Whereas in the case of precision fermentation, you're actually um, rebuilding the meat in a molecular sense. So you're actually building the how you're using the same building blocks as what meat consists of. But instead of using animals, you're using microorganisms. Um, so I do see that happening, and if we actually get to the level of sophistication where we can include the whole palette of amino acids, that would actually be the best way forward, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, the most difficult part of that is if we had some steak, for example, which is essentially just a muscle tissue. We can't really do that yet, really well anyway. We are getting better at it, but yeah, it's quite expensive, etc. But most meat products are grinded down, they are minced, etc. And we can do that quite easily. Um, I mean, what is a burger? It's not it's not muscle tissue. It's minced meat, um, and we can do that. So anyway,
Yes.
so yeah, magical is I thought I had with this bit. So then we have the footnotes. Yeah, I don't have any notes on that. And then we have the next chapter, biodiversity loss. So that concludes this talk this week. So if you want to join in next Saturday, we're going to do this next Saturday, I suppose. Um, then are we going to do this next Saturday, or how is your calendar?
For me, next Saturday is fine. Yeah, sure.
I think I can make it next Saturday. Yeah, should be fine. If I have an internet connection at the time, because I will be at a different place. Normally, that's not much of an issue. So yeah, next time, next week, we're going to discuss chapter 6. And if you want to join in on Discord or on this live stream, go to stream.greennuclear.online. Follow me on Mastodon. I'll be announcing that on the Mastodon, so you can follow me or join the stream if you like. If you want to make a donation, that would be great. So I do have a link for that. That's this link. That would be great because I am running this stream infrastructure myself, as is the Mastodon, as is other stuff. On this link, you will see a big number that I am trying to raise. Essentially, it is a number where I can say I can do this kind of stuff full time. Not only streams, of course, but it's all kinds of advocacy for nuclear energy, eco-modernism, etc. So if you want to join or want to support me in that, that would be awesome. So, do you have any last comments, Windhammer?
Mm, No, to be honest, I don't know a lot about agriculture, but I did agree with everything Hannah said.
All right. Hannah is making a good case for her calls. Good. Hey, then thanks for joining in and see you next week.